What's up, X-Subs? I wanted to go over all of my notes right here. All of my notes on the Tucker and Vladimir Putin interview. Here's the summary of what I saw over a 2-hour period. Number one, Putin is ridiculously intelligent. He's a historian. He goes in the first 20 minutes and talks about the history of Russia and how they came together. The second thing is he's clearly, again, not in the same vein of intelligence and a man of history, his intelligence is off the charts. Like, he's speaking in specifics. He understands the history of Russia. He understands the culture of Russia. He understands the outward ideas that are imposed on Russia. And he clearly speaks with sophistication, intelligence, and details. So these are the first two things that I clearly noticed from this interview. Number three, he clearly understands the 5 waves of expansionism that has happened around him, from NATO building weapon systems to encroachment on the borders of his country. Like, he clearly expounded on the 5 waves of expansionism that he's seen over his 22, 23 years of being president of Russia. Number 4, he understands the CIA. He understands the 3-letter organizations that have clearly worked against him for over 2 decades and even beyond that. He's a realist, he's a pragmatist, and he understands how this, let's just say, the under the cover organizations, the shadow organizations are really running things. And number 4, I think this is was that number 4? Yeah, that was number 4. Number 5, man, the thing that I took away from this, and it was the most profound thing that I took away from this, is that Putin and Russia have always been in a position to negotiate. These guys are always willing to come to the negotiation table around anything. And in the title right here, I was thinking about titling this, if I were to put it on YouTube, as Russia. America constantly shafts Russia at the deal table. That's essentially what has happened. If you listen to Putin and you take him for what he says, and you take his words for what they're worth. So if you haven't watched the interview, I highly recommend it. It's an interview that talks about history, talks about the past, talks about decisions that were made, and he's very good. He's so intelligent. He understands that the Russian people are going to be watching this. And so out of all my notes here, let me just go through. I went through a summary real quick, but these are the things he talked about. Started talking about the history of Russia and Ukraine. And he brought receipts. He gave Tucker a big stack of paper that said, hey, here's what's happened. Here's the history. Not only that, he went into talking about what happened after World War II. And after what happened after World War II, and even deeper into that, from 1922, and what happened after the USSR. And Tucker asked him questions like, why wouldn't you just reacquire Ukraine when you took over the presidency in 2000? And what was interesting is he said, well, that's just not how it worked. Is because they kept coming to the deal table and they kept getting shafted at the deal table. And frankly, I kind of felt a little bit bad for the Russian leadership, in that they've always had this willingness to come to the deal table, to come to the negotiation table, only to have the deals be accepted, and then minutes later, days later, weeks later, have it be reneged because of some CIA or some other alternative organization is telling the leadership to do something different. And so you have to feel for Putin. You have to feel for their leadership, in that how many times are you going to come to the deal table only to get shafted? How many times are you going to come with goodwill and say, look, we can figure this out, only to have the rug pulled underneath your feet and realize that they're just going to do the same shenanigans over and over again? It's really, really depressing. And so he talked about how he agreed that he was okay with negotiating and joining NATO, given that the provisions were right, and that the NATO should stop expansion, stop growing towards their borders. And if you think about it, if you just take it personally, if you had a house and there were people that you don't know that keep getting closer and closer to your house, and you want to get to the negotiation table, and they say, well, we're not going to negotiate, we're just going to keep encroaching on your land, you're eventually going to get to a point where you're like, hey, this must stop. And that's what essentially happened with Ukraine. Is Russia said, look, you guys keep coming closer to our borders. You keep coming and encroaching in on us. We have to stop this now before it gets too bad. What are some other things? They talked about how USA, this was really, really interesting. It just shows his sophistication. He knows that the USA leads by vote, but anytime the USA votes on NATO, everybody else just follows along like lemmings. And so he understands that the USA runs NATO. Not only does USA run NATO, but the USA runs the media apparatus. Like, Putin is not unawares of this. He knows that the mainstream media, from America to even Europe, in even areas within the East, in Asia, are controlled or manipulated by the mainstream media of America and the banksters and the mainstream media counterparts that are all telling everybody, here's the narrative you need to play. Here's how we're going. Right? And so Putin constantly says that he's undercut by other systems of people. And Tucker asks a great question here. He says, sounds like presidents don't run the show. And Putin's like, brother, come on. You of all people who, interestingly enough, he took a nice jab at Tucker and said, hey, Tucker, I know that you applied to the CIA, but you got rejected. That was an interesting nugget there. But it's like, brother, you should know this, right? The presidents don't run anything. And we've known this for decades, right? And what's so interesting is Putin brought up several times the political coups that happened. For example, the Ukraine election. They had a third election after they didn't like the first two, and they had a third one. I mean, and he gave a good example. Imagine if we had that in our election, right, where we had an election coming up, and let's say it's Trump versus Biden, and Biden Trump wins, and so they'd hold another election to resubstantiate and say, well, no, the first election results didn't matter. Let's just go for another one. Okay, this time, third round, Biden wins. I mean, our country would be split apart. But yet this happened in Ukraine, and we're not upset about it. It just happened, and we let it slide. All right, and so these things are happening all the time. It's just amazing that he can speak with such non-emotion about this coup that happened in Ukraine. And, you'd think he'd be upset about it, right? You think he'd be upset about it. You think he'd be like, dude, bro, like, be bitter about it. Be like, why are you guys keep doing this to us? But how many times in the interview he said, that's your problem. You guys made a mess of this, America. You made a mess of this, NATO. You guys need to fix your mess. It's not up for us to fix your problems. We came to you at the negotiation table. We're willing to negotiate, and then you guys keep messing it up. So why should we clean it up? And so it's an interesting posturing from Putin in that in the world stage, he's just waiting for, I want to say it this way, but he's kind of waiting for America and the rest of the world to do the right thing. But I think he also understands the fact that that's never going to happen. They're not going to do the right thing, right? There's always deep pockets and deep interests to do the wrong thing at the expense of everybody else, but the beneficial thing to the banksters, or to the people who run the show. They're getting their pockets loaded with gold and bullion, right, while everybody else suffers. And so Putin understands this. He understands this dynamic. One thing that I appreciated is his foreknowledge, or maybe foresight, around saying that the wounds will be healed of Ukraine. I love that. That was a positive idea, in that regardless of how this falls out, whether Russia destroys Ukraine, whether they come to some sort of negotiation and peace deal, regardless, he believes that the wounds will heal from Ukraine and they will come back into the Russian fold. And he desires to stop all wars. I remember this one. He said that the last time he talked to Biden, he told Biden that it was a bad idea to do this Ukraine thing, right? And he said, if I quote, extort American taxpayers and weaken Russia. He knows this. He understands it's a geopolitical game of weakening Russia over the long term, and that's going to make it easier for the big elites at play to be able to overtake or insert themselves into Russian life, into Russian politics, into Russian industry. And that's what they want. They want to make money. But Putin and Russia are somewhat immune to this because they see what's happening. And so, again, another note here that USA controls the global media, and that the U.S. dollar has been weaponized, which he called a grave mistake against the world. and that the trade between Russia and China is actually far stronger than we imagine, certainly than mainstream media tells us. And that, and here's a great point here, is that he believes that the world needs to adapt to the changes of the world instead of taking a domination approach, which is the American foreign policy. Let's dominate everything. Let's take over everything. Let's make sure that we have, our hands up the puppets' butts so that we can tell them what to say and tell them what to do. Instead, Putin is saying we just need to adapt instead of be a dominating force, right? We should adapt to how the market's changing, how the world is changing, the needs are changing. Instead of the same old trope of America, world police, trying to dominate everybody and force their will into everything. That was really, really powerful idea. He ended up talking about Elon Musk and AI and whether AI is going to take over the world. And I thought that was a funny moment. But all in all summary, so this isn't a super detailed summary, but I promised you guys I'd give you my first thoughts, is that I love hearing from the mouthpiece of Putin. I love hearing. Now, there's conspiracies out there that it's not him, it's someone fake, an actor, because we have plenty of those that are play acting as presidents and play acting as people of notoriety. We see masks all the time. So who knows? It could be Putin, it could be someone else. It doesn't matter. Regardless, the man that we saw and the man that we listened to is deeply intelligent, deeply sophisticated. He understands history. He understands the Russian people. He understands how they've been seen through the lens of the mainstream media, Western mainstream media, but he also can communicate effectively the realities of how Russia is doing well and how they're growing and how they are seeking peace. They're seeking to be part of the world stage. And interestingly enough, he did make a comment, if you watched, that he believes that the only way to true world peace is have an overarching global governance at some level. Now, that's kind of like, if he believes that, then why isn't the World Economic Forum, why aren't all the elites letting him join in instead of sanctioning him to death, instead of cutting off trade from all these countries that are part of NATO and part of the WEF and all this stuff? Like, why aren't they including him? It seems to be that there's this bad blood that has transpired over many decades, and there's this common narrative about the Russian people and about the Russian culture that they're our enemies. They're not our enemies. I've traveled the world. I've talked about this before, and I'll tell you, at the end of the day, if you're a good person, you're going to be able to relate and be good people to other good people, no matter the nation, whether it's India, China, Russia, Pakistan. Everybody just wants peace and prosperity for them and their family. It's the global elites, the leaders of these countries, that create suffering, that create wars. There's nobody that I know that wants to create wars, right, and wants to make things worse off for themselves and their economy and their family. No one wants that. It's the global leaders that do this. And so if I were to say in summary, as a takeaway from everything that I learned in these 2 hours of watching Tucker ask some really intriguing questions to Putin, is that Putin is a pragmatist. He understands the realities of how the world works. He understands the realities of politics and the constraints and the issues of politics and how they constantly renege and pull back from their promises and break promises. Like, he understands this. And so he made that clear in several statements that he's waiting for the world to do right, essentially, waiting for the U.S. to come back to the table, waiting for NATO to come back to the table, waiting for other countries to come back to the negotiation table to make things right and make things work. And so I think he's a regardless of what you think about the man, and of course nothing really can we verify except some of the historical dates that he espoused. We can fact check those, and I'm sure those are right. And they happened, but those are his perspectives. So can we never ever know the true Putin? Can we ever know the true mental models of how he sees the world, what his real deal is, what he really cares about, and what he's really pushing for? No, we'll never know that. But just if we take the man for his words, he's sophisticated, he's intelligent, he's a pragmatic leader, he understands the realities of what's going on in the world, and at the same time, he prioritizes Russia over everything else, as he should, because the Russian people are the ones that are looking to him for leadership. And he knows that many of his Russian people are going to be watching this interview that he did with Tucker. And he knows that part of it's propaganda. He knows he needs to say the right things to galvanize the Russian people. I get that. Peace, no problem. But let's just leave you with this one scenario, this one juxtaposition. Could you imagine President Biden, going up against Putin in a debate? Come on, guys. It would be a joke. It would be a laughing stock. It would be one of the most embarrassing moments in our presidential history, period, full stop. Joe Biden would get crushed. I mean, he can't even remember what he ate yesterday. He doesn't even remember when his son died. He doesn't even remember where he stored documents. Like, I mean, if you're at the world stage and you're thinking about Putin and you're thinking about Biden, man, our political system has done us a deep disservice. We have a leader right now in President Joe Biden who literally is an incompetent, mentally handicapped, maybe slow individual. And we're not winning any good points here. So it's time for a change. Time for a change of our leadership. Maybe 2024 will be that year, I guess, if you vote. Let me know your thoughts. Thanks, X-Subs. I love being able to do this stuff for you guys.